Greetings, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the Digital Journey, New Opportunities and Challenges for the Auditor, our final live session at Exemplar Global's Food Safety Expo. I'm your host, Mike Richmond. Exemplar Global is pleased to take our virtual events to the next level with these interactive live sessions, which allow you, the viewer, to interact with our panelists on some relevant topics and chat with them about your questions and comments that you may have. We encourage your questions, as I mentioned, anytime during the session. To post a question for our panel, simply type it into the chat box and then we'll get it over to our panelists. Also, if you may note, this session is being recorded and will be made available on demand. So if you're watching the recorded version, wherever you are in the world, you can email any questions to my colleague Jane Bowler at jboler, J-B-O-L-E-R, @exemplarglobal.org, and we'll then forward your questions on to our panelists. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Keith Phillips, who is the CEO of assessment platform provider Quantum Leap Beyond Spreadsheets. Keith, it's all yours.
Wonderful, wonderful. Good morning, planet. Good morning, world. It's not often that you have the planet listening to you. In fact, we have, talking about that, the panel is from all four corners of the earth with enormous experience of both the certification bodies, the brand owners, if you like, retailers, as well as some practitioners. And we'll introduce them as we go forward, but it's a very good area. My background, just I've been a serial transformational agent since I fell in love with Apple computers as a young man and launched their Macintosh 128K, that wonderful floppy disk drive Macintosh head, if you remember the technology. But the journey has been one of transforming industries, and this industry, I think, is an extremely interesting one that has a long way to go, and we're starting off, but we have around the world thousands of auditors and inspectors and assessors who are at the moment using tools that are essentially part of the last century. In our particular case, spreadsheets tend to be the norm, and shifting from spreadsheets to technologies like cloud and that are database driven can provide distinct advantages. And that's the purpose of today's session, is to get the real experience of groups of people who are in an advanced stage of the technology or digital journey. First off, we have Marco.
Yes, good.
Before I get there, Marco, before I get there, all of these are digital travelers, and I think Marco is an example of that. And so, you know, going digital, what does that actually mean? I try to define it really as a person who has an attitude that really seeks out and does this. And I always remember the first time talking to Marco and showing him some technology that could help assessment, and his eyes lit up. You could see the energy from the man himself. He said, you know, I've been thinking about this for some time, and here I found a solution to this particular problem that I was looking at. And it's that sort of attitude. And it's why I'm putting Marco up front and central, because he is a person that has that attitude, seeking new systems to enable him to do things better than he has in the past. Now, Marco is the lead for Italy's leading certification body, CCPB.
Yes.
But he's also the chairperson, is the co-chair of the Global Gap Certification Body Committee. So he has the awesome responsibility of orchestrating the representative certification bodies from around the world and providing feedback to Global Gap themselves, one of the leading schemes for the agricultural industry. Over to you, Marco. You're going to take us through a case study. He's actually applied the technology, not only embraced it, but applied it, I think, in one of the more difficult scenarios we've ever seen. So we kind of started off with that to see what can be done. Marco.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Kate. Hello, people. Very nice to join this Food Safety Expo. This gives me the opportunity to speak about my experience that I'm doing now actually, and I just want to report my impressions about the use of technologies in making audits, because my job is mainly the auditor. I play as an auditor in my CB, and I am also a coordinator. So COVID-19 speed up the process of digital auditing, because we faced many problems last year because we are not able to organize. We see all black, no light, because we cannot move from our country. We cannot take planes, make arrangements with the companies. It's very difficult. But I have to say that thanks to the technology, I can just sustain my company, also from an economical point of view, because we are able to make audits. First of all, I would like to talk an exemplar audit that we made last year, because in this trial, there are many people involved, not only us as certification body, but also consultants, farmers, and other people involved. And it was the very first time that we adopt such kind of technology that could allow us to represent in a realistic way the situation, because we were able to connect themselves, to take pictures, to make video, to make the process as realistic as possible, because technology could also support us, because the smartphones are very used around the world. Everyone could use a smartphone. And in this trial, just to give you an example, I was in Italy, the auditor was in Egypt, and the company was in Lebanon. And so there are also consultants involved and also farmers involved at farm level. The background in Italy of digitalization, I'm speaking about audits, is a ground level. There is nothing. So as I mentioned before, COVID-19 gave us the opportunity to make this challenge, to use new technology, but beyond the crisis, because the digital audit could allow us to spare some money, to make audits also in difficult parts of the world. For example, we are planning to make audit in Syria. That is not very quiet country to.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and at beginning, no one used the platform that QLBS provide us, because Kate is enlightened people that could see beyond. And we are not people used to make such kind of things, but in few steps, we are able to connect themselves and to drive also the farmers around the farm itself. So we could see the processes of harvesting, of storaging, we can see the fruits on the plants. Definitely, we make an audit that could be very realistic and transparent to the people who want to see how our job was done. I mean, our accreditation body, for example. I am very satisfied of it, and surely I will use this technology for the future, because something has changed, and we have to absolutely adopt new technology also from an environmental point of view. If you have questions, I'm free to accept them, but please slow, because my English is quite awful, but I can understand. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Marco. We'll actually be taking questions on the chat. If you could fill in on the chat any questions you may have. Hopefully we will have time to answer all questions at the end of the session. Otherwise, we'll deal with them offline. But that's a wonderful, this case study, you had no option. You couldn't get to the farmers themselves. You had problems, both socio-political as well as pandemic, if you like, with that
Right.
marketplace. You were also able, I believe, to reduce the cost of the audit. Not that that was the real issue here, but it's a significant cost reduction because of the reduction in travel time. And I'm sure we'll have discussions at the end about how you can ensure the authenticity and integrity of an audit with the remote type of situation, and then the evolution of hybrids as well. So moving on to the next speaker, we do have somebody who has been truly global. It's Anthony. Anthony, and forgive me if I get this wrong, Anthony, but you headed up quality for Starbucks. That's on a global perspective, and then you went to the Amazon Foods, where you were heading up food compliance for the Amazon. And everybody that knows Amazon knows that that's one of the most interesting collection of food retailer companies that's evolving in the Amazon space. They're actually changing the world of retail. Anthony is now has his own consultancy. So anyone who needs that level of advice and guidance should connect with us. So Anthony, wonderful. Take it away if you would.
All right, thank you very much, Keith. Good day to all. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. So as Keith introduced me, yes, I've been developing and running food safety programs for Starbucks Coffee, for Amazon over years, and now just recently I established my company called Safe Food Zone. The website actually went live this morning, so just to tell you that this is pretty new. And so I wanted to share with you, some of the things that I've developed in the as I was running food safety for retailers. If we can go to the next slide, and really, you can integrate food safety. You could integrate technology into every element of the food safety program. And so in just 5 minutes or so, I won't go into a lot of details, but one of the things I wanted to start with is that technology, doesn't have to always be super sophisticated and expensive. There's different degrees of technology. It's not all machine learning and really complex algorithm. It can be just, more simple and affordable, like consolidating data and making it available real time for anyone that is authorized and that needs it. So a lot of different degrees of technology and complexities that can go into the program. A few things that I wanted to share that I've done when I was at Amazon. One was, and all the elements were interconnected, but important to mention how retailers nowadays are using technology to compile customer feedback monitoring. At Amazon, there's more than 45 million pieces of customer feedback per week, and you can imagine that with human beings, it's about impossible to make sense of all of that information. So technology was developed to be able to sort and prioritize and respond to such quantity of feedback, building trends and being able to take action on high severity issues, and that's something that was the first element of the program that I've developed, and that's something that was tremendous success. That works at Amazon, that Amazon now is making available as well for others, but super important part of technology, because again, dealing with millions pieces of feedback is not something that can be done manually. I also wanted to quickly mention about the recall program, because there's a lot of elements into the recalls that leverage technology. Again, talking about scales with Amazon selling millions of products, that means like they're facing with like thousands of recall cases per year, and so that translates into actually hundreds of thousands SKUs involved with recalls. So the first part that technology plays is to identify, to search for recall notification on the regulators' websites. Again, a human being could be doing this, but definitely not as fast, as comprehensively. So web scraping is something that just identify recalls. And then second part, which is very important once you've identified a recall case, to try to translate that and to see, which SKU into your portfolio is involved with a recall. Again, not something that you could be doing manually. And so super important to have developed classification that can identify all of the products, based on the word in the title, based on imaging, based on machine learning, trying to very quickly identify which products are involved into a recall. And when that is done, your whole system being linked, stop selling the product and being able to identify the orders associated with the product so that customer can be notified within hours. And then similarly, taking action at inventory level so that the supply chain is being cleaned up, connecting with your suppliers and your supplier-based programs so that suppliers are informed and stop shipping a product that is involved, or ingredients that would be involved into a product that is being recalled. And then third element, probably most relevant to this webinar, is about how do you control product and suppliers? How do you make sure that you can very quickly identify products that are high risk, and then depending on the risk level of product stream, you're going to trigger a workflow that can go, again, very sophisticated to less sophisticated, making sure that the QA department is going to be involved to validate a product before it's being shipped, right? So it can go as far as, as soon as a product is being entered into the system recognizes it's a high risk, and therefore, because it's a high risk, it triggers a request for a lab to ask for sample to the manufacturer. Manufacturer sends its sample to the lab. Lab does its work and basically enter the lab results into the database. And basically, the only thing that the QA department needs to do is to make sure that pre-shipment a product has been tested and approved. So again, tons of information to manage suppliers and product that can be done pretty easily and immediately available through database system. And then, with the time allocated, I wanted to quickly talk about training as well, which is something, that's next slide. Training has changed tremendously. I think in previous webinar, there was discussions about the challenge of training people and keeping them trained. And so technology has really helped in many ways. It has helped, in terms of convenience. When you organize a training now, you don't have to take the plane and go to another country to get a training. The training is available to you whenever you want. And actually for auditors, that means that, you're going to have on your little tablets an explanation, if you need to, about what a particular line of the checklist means. And then, you can make it as fancy as you want. You can have like pictures, you can have like videos. So super convenient. Obviously, scale is very important. Technology into training, that means like you can train stakeholders, you can train operators, you can train auditors, as many as you want. You don't need to worry about how many trainers you're going to have, because once the system's in place, it's just like it can be rolled out to as people as you want. And then super important as well is the personalization. With training, you can modify and make participants into a change the training itself so that it's going to be more relevant to them. And then talking about relevance, also super important, the fact that you can appeal now to people in a way that is closer to what they are used to, like bring people in a classroom or give them a book, and frontliner and manufacturers are unlikely to be really engaged. But if ever you develop a game, and now your food safety training becomes a video game, your response rate is going to be definitely very different. And then last thing I wanted to add to that is that's true for all technology, but if training as well is, putting all your food safety program online gives you an amazing opportunity to get feedback. It's interactive, so permanently, if people like it, if they're using it, what part they would like to see improved, and then whenever a training or any other element of a food safety program has been used, it triggers records, which are super useful, so that, for yourself, as a manufacturer, as a retailer, but also, like being ready when regulators come. Now you've got all the elements of your food safety program that are documented. Anyway, Keith, I've been trying to cram all of that in just a few minutes. I was not too
well,
long.
I think that was wonderful. Actually, I think that was extremely articulate. I think we went through quite a long journey, and there was a lot of condensed information. Just one thing, if people want to follow up, what's the email address of your new website? Sorry, not the web address of your new site.
Okay, it's safefoodzone.com. So pretty straightforward. Foodzone.
Safefoodzone.com.
Yeah, and my email is anthony@safefoodzone.com.
Safe Foods, anybody wants to follow up on that, you know where to find him. Otherwise, channel your questions back through Exemplar Global, and we'll find him. Thank you very much. That's wonderful. Now let's move right along to the next speaker. Colin Christmas is one of these people that actually does get it. He has actually both embraced technology and the whole world of food. A deep background in Nestle, wasn't it, Colin? The actual quality in food, and Nestle as a brand provider, but he is now managing director of a USA-based international certification body, which he runs obviously out of cyberspace. In other words, using technology as well as aeroplanes, from his home in Brazil. Now, beat that, as a truly global business player. Obviously, he has partners in the United States that help him. But Colin, you can add to that story. But I think more importantly, Colin has been co-convener of the working group for the IAF, that's the International, what is it? Association for Food, I think it is, but correct me. Really working on the GFSI race to the top. But Colin, why don't you just tell the story? What have you been working on there, and then take us through your thoughts on the future of auditing?
Thanks, Keith. So yes, Keith, I'm Colin Christmas. I had a 20-year career with Nestle, and with that career at Nestle, I spent my first 10 years looking at ISIT systems, business processes, business excellence around quality management, food safety processes for Nestle. The second half of my career in Nestle, or the second 10 years as I define it, was working with management systems, where we implemented food safety, quality management systems, occupational health and safety, environmental management systems, and I was working in North and South America. And I've really felt passionate enough about those management systems to move into the world of certification bodies in the last 18 months to work for a certification body in the US that's growing globally. So that's kind of my background. My first slide here, I've got a juggler in the food space from a certification body's perspective. It is a juggling act, and there's some challenges there. And ultimately, if we can just go to the second slide there, Keith, is we have multiple certifications available. So we have a choice in the market. Organizations clearly have a choice. This can be seen as a very good thing. Some of the schemes that we have are regional, some are global, but with choice sometimes becomes complexity, and ultimately from a certification body's perspective, it also adds that ability to pick and choose which schemes that we want to offer for accredited certification. So with a whole wide of schemes, my company that I work for offer the majority of the schemes, a lot that are listed here, encompassing GFSI recognized schemes, encompassing retailer addendums, and so forth. But from a certification body's perspective, to stay on top of this is quite a challenge. Every scheme goes through a revision cycle. If we look at ISO schemes, they typically on a 5 to 7 year program for revision. If we look at some of the other schemes that we have in the food space, they may have a 2-year revision cycle. So you have to understand what are the changes in the revision. You have to train auditors. Your clients or the organizations you serve have to go through the same process as well of understanding what that revision is and to be ideally audit ready when the auditor comes knocking on the door. Then in addition, you have retailer addendums. So the retailers such as McDonald's, Costco, a few others will request an addendum. Certification bodies such as Eagle, myself, we offer those addendums as well, but you have to learn the addendum, be trained and qualified and competent to be able to deliver against that addendum. And then finally, we see things like regulator addendums that are not mentioned here, but in the US, for example, we had scheme owners creating regulator addendums. And the challenge being is at that time, there was not a relationship with the regulator to always get their permission or even their sign off on these regulator addendums. So in some cases, scheme owners were second guessing what the requirements are. They are not offering guarantees that would always meet a regulatory inspection at the end of the process. So that's some of the challenges that we see with the complexity of growing schemes. And then the final piece is the governance that we have as well. So for certification bodies that are accredited, there's different governance layers above us. So as Keith mentioned, I'm the co-convener at the IAF, which is the International Accreditation Forum. So they have a governance role. It goes from a certification body, which will execute the audit, an accreditation body, which will oversee the certification body, and then if necessary, there is an opportunity for appeal or a complaint process that goes right through to the IAF. So you'll see 3 different layers there. And then when you have schemes that's added into the mix, you'll have the additional requirements for scheme owner governance, integrity programs, where they will come in and ask similar questions to the accreditation bodies as well. So a lot of complexity from the CB. You have to learn a scheme, you have to have competent auditors, you have to have clients that understand it, and then you have to be flexible enough to adapt when there are various oversight programs against you as well. If we can go to the next slide, Keith. So, you know, the key thing I always say when we look at the problems with having choice and the benefits or the opportunities is really the key statement here is things like food safety, food security, international supply, international trade, they are all interdependent. So at the end of the day, we need to have non-standardized, if we have non-standardized processes, there's a detrimental impact. So really the goal is to have minimum standards that must be adhered to. And those standards must work well with the standard owners, the scheme owners, must work well with the organizations who have to understand them and implement them, must work well with certification bodies that have to audit against them, and then must work well, very importantly as well, with regulators that will be writing their own public policy for things like food safety, food security, and international trade, and it all fits in together. So ultimately, minimum standards is our goal, and harmonization is absolutely critical in this process. We can go to the next slide, Keith. So then what does that really mean in terms of the future of auditing? When we look at an audit, one of the first things we say is what's really the purpose for an audit? And an audit is really for an auditor to go into an organization and to determine a level of confidence that there is conformity and compliance to a set of requirements. So if we are looking for ensuring confidence and helping organizations give them a clear indication whether they're compliant or not to regulatory and scheme owner requirements, is today we have this mindset to say, well, to do that, we have to go in every year, we have to perform an audit, it can be prescriptive, we tick off the requirements, job done, we'll see you again next year. So that's the current mindset that we're in today in terms of how to execute an audit. And because of food safety, because the consequences are so severe in terms of consumer harm or consumer death, the enforcement of that audit is critical. So when we look at that as well, we have to also understand that auditing is risk-based. If we are determining that there is a level of confidence that comes out as a result of the audit, what does that really mean? Well, whether an auditor goes in every year or whether conformity requirements can be determined alternatively, that's the key. So what we've seen, obviously, during the pandemic, we've seen a shift from on-site auditing to remote auditing. That has been quite a challenge, but I think we've proved the point over the last 18 months, whilst it is difficult, it's not always impossible. So that opens up a lot of questions, and I think that will accelerate the mindset to where the future of auditing is going to go. So for example, now we're seeing with remote auditing that the challenge of paper records. During a remote audit, it's very difficult to put pieces of paper up in front of an auditor on a Zoom call. Records are not always freely available. Different functions typically have records in different places. So actually locating all of the records, it can be quite a complicated business. So we're seeing a shift now where organizations really finally have come to the conclusion that they have to have electronic records. And this is the digital impact that we're currently going through. Keith alluded to this, that ultimately we have relied historically on documents that were paper-based, Excel spreadsheets that were not linked to the cloud and so forth. And that mindset is now changing. People see the benefits. So when we see that, we see the auditor today will go into an organization and they will observe work. So the auditor will do a factory tour, they'll observe a work practice. Is that being executed as per the procedure, as per the policy? And we're now seeing some sophisticated tools in the auditing world that is moving to surveillance. Whether you like it or not, it's Big Brother, it's surveillance cameras, and they can be used for various purposes. And in some cases, they can be observed for our processes being executed on a shop floor correctly. So from that, we move from an auditor that may come in historically and start looking at paper records, an auditor that would then go into a shop floor and observe work performed, and an auditor that would sample data. And one of the key points here is when you look at sampling of data, an auditor may come in, they have maybe 2 days to complete their audit that is executed each year. So you have a lot of work to cover the requirements in that short period of time. So how does an auditor solve that? Well, they sample data. And an auditor will go in and say, look, I want to see the last I want to see 5 production records for your last calendar year. And so based on that sample, the auditor will have a confidence level where the processes and procedures are compliant to the requirements and to regulatory statutory requirements as well. What we will see in a digital world is there's going to be a shift from sampling of data to analyzing data. And already we see that in internal programs within big organizations which have a lot of digitalization of records. So for example, I've worked at Nestle for 20 years in internal audits. The auditors would have access to ERP systems such as SAP, and they will come into an organization like Nestle and say, I'm not going to sample 5 production runs for the last calendar year. I've already, before arriving on site, looked at 100% of your production data for the last calendar year. And I've looked at consumption of expired materials. I've looked at the number of employees or the operators on that production line. I've looked at release records. I've looked at temperature checks. I've looked at in-process analysis. So you will see that shift with the access to data is much more intensive, but ultimately will give you a much higher confidence level and enforce much stronger disciplines in the execution of an audit process. So, perfect example, if you're going to sample data, you're going to look at 5 production runs in the last calendar year, and let's say that there has been 800 production runs. So will you ever find that needle in a haystack? Probably not. The auditor may get lucky and find a defect, may find a problem that relates to an observation, that relates to a non-conformity, that relates to protecting an organization to make safer food. If you look at 100% of data analysis, if records are digitized, then you have the ability to find that needle in a haystack. Now that's going to be tough for some organizations because that's going to be much more invasive than they used to before. But if we look at the big picture, the expected outcome is safe food for the consumer, the output is much better than what we currently have. So all of that comes with digitalization, all of that comes with new technology, and all of that comes, most importantly, when you analyze data, is sharing of data. Now we know in food safety, the key thing is sharing data is, a lot of it is confidential, a lot of it is sensitive data. So some organizations do not want to share that data, but it can be shared in a way, I believe, that meets the confidentiality requirements, that meets sensitivity requirements, that actually is hugely valuable to supply chains today. And ultimately today we have a lot of discussions, and it's talked about data exchange. And there's a lot of commentary around data exchange, because data exchange implies that data goes into something, could go into an organization, could go into an initiative, could go into a regulator, but it has to come out. And in a lot of cases today, we see data going in, but data doesn't come out. And ultimately, if you don't have the data to analyze, you're not going to have a true picture of what your risk levels are, what your confidence level is, and ultimately where your next failure is going to come from. So that's what we're going to see, I believe, in the future of auditing, much more digitalization and much more ability to really find that needle in the haystack, the one thing that could trip up an organization, that could relate to a food safety recall, that could relate to consumers being in hospital, and worst case, consumers actually dying from a foodborne illness. So I'm very excited about what the future can bring in terms of what technology can help in the future of auditing.
Well, thank you, Colin. That's a very, very concise and motivational ending. I think it's a very exciting career. I think that a very exciting space that that the industry is moving into, from ticking checklists to knowledge harvesting, if you like, making a higher end added value, not only to the audit itself, but to the stakeholders and players around there. So I guess to round off this august list, we have the leader of Exemplar Global. We have Andrew Baines, who has a deep background working for the Southern Hemisphere's largest certification body, Assure Quality, that's focused on food, and has now been for some time leading Exemplar Global. He's also been a director of the American Society for Quality, ASQ. But Andrew, introduce yourself if you would, and close the formal speaker sessions.
Thank you, Keith, and hi everybody around the world. Good morning, afternoon, or evening. It's lovely to be here. What a great selection of speakers we've had. I want to pick up on a couple of points that Colin's just made, actually, because it segues really nice to some of the things that I'm going to talk about. But just in leading into that and to Keith's question, I am actually a food safety auditor myself by heritage. I think I did my auditor training in 1987 back in the UK, when life was an awful lot simpler. It was even before ISO 9001, and many things have changed in that time. But to Colin's point, and I just want to reiterate, but it's a really important point, what's the point of an audit? it's to gather evidence upon which we can gain confidence to certify them or that they comply with something, be it regulator or others. Often an audit has many different stakeholders with an interest in what the audit outcome is. And it's all about gathering information and confidence and trust in that process. We can go to the next slide, Mike, please. Now, as I say, I've been around auditing for an awful long time, and we've constantly had change. And Colin was alluding there to the number of standards that have been emerged over the years and the complexity of those. But I want to suggest this to you. I think this is a time of change unprecedented for auditors before. It's more akin in some ways to the evolution of aeroplanes over the course of the Second World War, from biplanes built with canvas and wood through to max speed jets by the end of it over about 5 or 6 years' time. It was an incredible period of change, and we're in the same period of change. This is not a time like the development of a new standard, the issue of a new standard. We're not going to go from one version to another. We'll all learn it and then steady state for the next 5 years. This is going to continue to change around us. The technologies that we're talking about and that we're alluding to, in many ways, are the new, but they're a bit like the old mobile phones. They're a big clunky sort of a thing, but they're going to get much more refined. And the more refined they get, we're going to see change that is both incremental and radical. The technology itself is still developing and in fact emerging, and it's driving ongoing opportunity for us. Now, a number of the speakers have spoken on the panels about the challenge, the human challenge for this, the challenge for auditors, and that's absolutely right. I'm going to talk about that a little too, but we've got to come back to this point of what's the purpose of the audit. Now, when we audit as we do now, and have done for 30 plus years to my own evidence, we've done that because we have to do it that way. That's been the best way to do it. It's been the way that's worked best. But if you were to consider the statistical validity of that process of going in for a couple of days a year and sampling 5 out of those 800 records, it's actually negligible. But there's something much more at play in there, and that's the human effect of an auditor interpreting things. So how do we keep that whilst at the same time gaining greater confidence of the findings that can be done? Now, the auditor's skills are going to need to harness the technologies, and these are considerable, and they lead us into thinking about what are the opportunities here. And in talking about this, I want to just also be clear that we're talking about all sorts of auditors. Primarily, mine goes to third-party auditors, certification body auditors, of which there are many tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands around the world. But there are also multiples of that of people doing second-party audits, supply chain auditing, and indeed internal auditors. Now, my comments are related to all of those. Whether you're an internal, second-party or third-party auditor, you're going to have to think about these skills. How can you best use them? How can you best use them to gather evidence, to make the confidence decisions that you're going to be able to ask to recommend? So auditor skills are going to need to be aware of and utilise the technologies. We have digital platforms. QLBS, Keith, your excellent platform that we're building on, offers us opportunities to collect data and to analyse that data in a way unseen before, to do integrated auditing, to use different techniques and technologies to have input into that, to do the virtual audits remotely and geographically dispersed that my colleagues on the panel have spoken about. Digital platforms are much more the way for the future than records on paper, in filing cabinets, in desks, where one report's somewhat disconnected from the others. Even for an individual customer, let alone for an aggregation of an industry sector, a country as a whole, or whatever it might be. The digital platforms offer us opportunity to do things untold of before. We're talking about things at the moment like Google Specs and auto-translate and so on. But imagine if we start using AI augmentation for an auditor, not to replace them, but to imagine we've all got a Siri or an Amazon Echo at home. Imagine if you had one of those with you as an auditor who knows all the standards, knows the clauses, can draw on precedent around the world and tell you in your ear now, real time, live, how has this been handled before by somebody? So we can do that remote and real time information gathering from technical support and technical assessors, as well as from a distance out there. We have an opportunity to use things like drones. Now, we're talking in terms of some of the remote audits that have been done, and one excellent case study. Part of this was done over 3 separate countries, over an entire continent, 2 continents. And yet imagine if the auditor, not looking through somebody else's glasses, but could fly a drone. What if you could have a micro drone that you could move around and look under the bacon slicer yourself to see whether it's dirty? What if we were to use things like social media to gather evidence, much more like the intelligence world does, to gather evidence about a company? Now, this is with their permission, of course, and yes, it would be a lot more robust in some ways, maybe even more intrusive, but the confidence that comes out of it would be substantial. So with all of these things emerging and the possibilities that come out of that, there's a real challenge. There's a real challenge for how do we take the current body of auditors and upskill them to use these things? And indeed, can we do that? Can you take the pilot of that biplane and have him flying a Mach 2 jet? Maybe you can. Maybe we can do that. But also what we can do is to recruit for new skills, bring these new skills into it, and indeed make auditing an attractive career choice again. That complexity of standards, the liabilities that go with it, have all made auditing a challenging career, shall we say. But look how exciting it could be. Look how exciting it could be for first, second, third party auditors. And somebody on the panel yesterday spoke about the integration actually of the audit parts. So the internal auditor is an eyes and ears for the third party auditor. What if you could access that while you're doing the internal audit? What if the third party auditor could be on your shoulder there to do this? When we look at the audit tools that we're talking about at the moment, and I'll be bold enough to suggest to the audience here that even including remote audits, what we're trying to do is to digitize the existing way of doing an audit. That 2 or 3 days a year where we visit the site, where we talk to the quality manager, where we go on a tour around, where we look at the records, etc., etc. But what if we set that on one side and said, imagine how an audit could be done. Imagine using these tools in a year or two's time, how we might do an audit, real time, every day. The auditor gets up in the morning, you look at your screens, you look at the dashboard for your company, the data's there. It's already from the Internet of Things there. And then when you do sample and go on site, and I still believe you will need to go on site from time to time, much more targeted, much more to a point. Now, why do I say you still need to go on site? Well, I am a food safety auditor myself, and you know, one of the most telling things that a food safety auditor will do when you walk into a room is just have a smell. Does it smell clean? Does it smell dirty? You know, that tells you so much without a question being asked. Can you hear? What can you hear? Are the pumps working well? You know, again, not a question's being asked. You can't replace those as far as I'm aware. Television's gone through an enormous changes, but we still don't have smelly vision. So I think there's a place for that audit, but it's augmented now by all of these skills. In order to gain the confidence for your certification body or for your regulator or for your customer base or for the representative through the supermarket chains, maybe we can put a lot more to effect. Maybe we can augment that visit with this real-time data, with social media, with feedback from staff, by looking over the internal auditor's shoulders. We can reinvent how an audit is undertaken. And to do that, think of the opportunity to be an auditor of the next 10 or 20 years. Might be after my time, but I can see it being much more like the pilot of a Mach 2 jet. Seriously, if we can recruit people that can use these technologies to gather the data, to analyse the data, and then disseminate the data. We've got a really fine career ahead of people here. And I just want to close on one final point. We're all well used to talking about risk management, and by risk management, what we do is we identify risk. If we can, we eliminate it, we minimise it, or we mitigate it. That's the standard risk management sort of tools. But I think what this last year has shown us is that we've also got to learn how to manage uncertainty. Risk is a part of that. Uncertainty brings some risk, but we've got to manage and audit for the uncertainty of times that will come with us and the continuity of change. We're not heading back to a steady state. So to be able to harness the change as it comes along, to engage people as auditors, first, second and third party again, who are comfortable to adapt and adopt the changes, to then use that data to the best of it. Over the next 20 years, I think we'll see people flying Mach 2 jets as auditors. And the tools available to us, I can see us flying a drone, a little micro drone. I can see us looking at real-time data, and I can see us communicating and collaborating with others around the world on a daily basis to inspire the confidence that we want, and by that to lift the game, the confidence in the food safety or the performance in quality or environmental performance, whatever it might be. We can really change the world using these technologies.
That
Back
was
to you,
terrific.
Keith.
Yeah, that's terrific, Andrew, and very exciting. Who wouldn't want to be in control of a Mach 2 jet if you have had a diet? It's almost like the America's Cup that we're doing today, these extraordinary aviation vehicles that are going around the water pretending to sail. It's very, very exciting and a revolution in itself. We're going to run the session over a bit just because there have been quite a lot of really good questions. We really want to hear your views and get your questions. If you've got any more, please use the chat session there. So those of you who want to stay with us to get some of those questions answered, we're going to run over just a little bit for your benefit. But if we can get into those questions, and I'd like to get just the panel together very, very quickly. Okay, panel. So we've got a question here, which is largely about, well, the first one is about how do you elicit change within your own organization? It's this whole issue of transformational change. And the question that came out in yesterday's, panel, we've had, occasions where the change has been forced and there's been a backlash to that from people who don't see the benefit of that change. So I wonder whether anybody'd like to make some comments about change management. We did touch on it a little in some of your sessions there. So Colin, perhaps we could start with yourself. You wrestled with this in Nestle, I guess, and you can represent both the brand person and the certification body as well.
Yeah, I smiled at that question, Keith. You might have got that cued. So at Nestle, I was director of supply management for Nestle USA. We had a huge number of ingredients and packaging suppliers, and so it was probably the most challenging role I've ever had to deal with, because there's always little things going on every single day. A lot of the big supplier issues we had did come down to change management. The changes that happened in their operations, they hadn't been managed well, and that resulted in food safety failure. We did a lot of supplier colleges, boot camps and training, and we always spent a lot of time in terms of making sure that the change management policy procedures were in place and they were executed really well. So that's maybe on a micro level, looking at maybe small incidents within your food safety management system. But if we look at change management as well, if you go to the starting point of actually putting in a food safety management system, one that has to be third-party audited for certification purposes. And one of the key things I always say is put a system in that works for your organization. Don't put a system in that you have to work for. And that's a really key statement with in terms of change management at the very beginning of understanding what a management system is going to do, a food safety management system. A lot of people can put it into a function. They can develop it independently from how they execute their business processes. And ultimately it becomes silo managed, and it becomes a system that you have to work for. You have to keep these records, and everything is not for the benefit of the organization. It's the benefit of keeping that certificate. So that's one of the key learnings I say is if you are working for your system and your system isn't working for you, you have to understand, you have to ask some fundamental questions about change management, and did you execute putting in a system the way it should have gone in.
Well, Marco, if you could add to that, I mean, you sit and get the views, if you like, across the CB community in your role as co-chairman, if you like, and you've identified that there's a lot of resistance to change. You know, that if it's one of the things about putting in a system, as you described it, Colin, that suits the organization. You may actually be, digitizing the past as opposed to building the future, which is a lot of what Andrew was talking about. And that's a really tricky, how that fundamental shift requires a different approach, with not to negate the least disruptive journey that you're talking about. But Marco, it'd be good to get your view of what's happening amongst the CBs. You're finding, particularly, I guess, in stress-related moments like the pandemics, people struggling to deal with what they've got at the moment. It'd be good to have your comment.
Yes. I have to say that there is a big curiosity about new tools to be used, but till now, there are many different databases, many different systems, technological systems to be used, settled by, for example, from different scheme owners. For example, Global Gap has its own, EFS has its own, BRC has its own. So they are afraid to spend more money to have another one to add to the list, because we require an harmonization of this kind of system. If you want to, something that could make the job easier, because when you work with different schemes, and each scheme has its own requirements in terms of technology, it could be not easy to handle together all these schemes. But we have to find a way to harmonize this scheme, because otherwise, in every CB, there are specialists, for example, for Global Gap, specialists for BRC, specialists for EFS, because each one of these schemes has its own IT tool. This is the problem now. But
so
people, people is not afraid about technology. I'm not speaking about CB. I'm speaking always of farmers, for example, companies. There is a curiosity, but they don't want to complicate their life too much. This is the point.
You need a universal system that can actually integrate and simplify and actually add value in terms of knowledge and data, as opposed to more and more complicated cost on a silo basis. I think that is a major issue that's sitting out there. The attempts of the GFSI to harmonize schemes is one thing. You actually need technology that can harmonize schemes and actually cope with multiple changing schemes, as Colin picked up in his presentation, going the way. Like anybody else like to add to that? It does seem that that's a universal issue within the organization with the audit.
Keith, I'll just offer a very quick comment. And that, as far as change is concerned, by and large, people don't object to change. What they object to is being changed, being imposed on them. So if you can include them in it, and if we can, I think one of the speakers, Anthony, I think might be you, was talking about gamifying education. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it simple, accessible, affordable, and to almost make it into a game that you're building levels of career and you build your experience, so that people are willingly participating in it as much as being changed. The imposition is what people really object to and rail against.
The one of the things that I've always found in these transformations is that well, firstly, we remember 20% of or 10% of what we're told, and 90% of what we do. It's to a certain extent, of making the change, get your hands on, do stuff. Whether it's a pilot or a demo or a exploration or something like that. That actually builds the confidence, and people start to realize the value. You've got to get to the point where they're actually getting the value, and it's got to be value that's added as opposed to additional complications on that.
I think that's
point.
Key. That's what's being brought to this, and there's an inevitability about it. It's gathered a momentum that's going to happen, and the auditor, the human element, risks becoming the limiting factor. How quick can we learn when the technologies are moving faster than we're learning them? And I suspect there'll be a generational change to this as well, is in as much as, when we look back to, I've forgotten who it was that predicted there'd be a worldwide market for 6 computers. Look where we're at, and look how quickly this has happened. Over the next 10 or 20 years, these things are inevitably going to happen, and the generations that are following us will just use these tools in a much more natural way than perhaps those of my generation. But that doesn't mean we can't be a useful part of it. The human experience, the mentoring, the wisdom of 20 or 30 years has still got a part to play in this. Where do you draw on that?
I think one of the other things, and this is a question that's coming out here, from some obviously person who's slightly frustrated in their own organization, we can understand that. It's an auditor says, yes, I feel the need to change. I do need to, I do want to have modern tools that can help me be a modern digital age auditor. But the organization I'm in is resistant to change. It starts at kind of at the top. There's got to be a strategic buy-in by your CEOs and so on. This is not, I've moved off the question, I'm making my own comments on that. To a certain extent, and this is my own view, that if you shift from being an auditing organization or an auditing team to being knowledge harvesters, and I don't mean being consultants, I mean actually, just as we've said, many of the panelists talking about, analyzing data, finding sources of data and information, finding new ways of actually aggregating evidence or viewing what's actually happening, taking information from areas, and then actually packaging it so that it can be processed for continuous improvement, but also that it can be packaged so that other people who need that data, such as the management. One of yesterday's case studies in the avocado industry was about they're starting to use audit or the results of audit as a continuous improvement or management tool that's helping them across 800 farmers in the avocado cooperative. So, becoming knowledge workers or harvesters. Once you have that vision, perhaps for your certification body, you start to think about what percentage of investment should you be putting in training? What percentage of your P&L should be in information technology? So again, it kind of shifts the needle, the adoption of technologies and the adoption of tools to develop people starts to shift. Thoughts on that? The question is about how do you get, I guess, at bottom level, how do you get your management to understand that this is important, I guess?
For example, can I say something, Kate?
Sure.
Yeah, just to give you an idea, in April, we have to start with the auditing remote, and we have to teach how a remote can be used. And we are organizing section for our auditors, okay? The half of April is dedicated to the IT tools for auditor in our company.
Sorry, could you repeat that? Just repeat that.
Half of our time in April will be dedicated to the use of IT tools for auditor.
In April, yeah.
In April, half of our time. It never happens before.
Yeah.
It never happens. But what can I say? That auditor is starting from riding a horse to riding a Ferrari. There is a big jump. There is a big jump. This is our challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah, Keith, I think also the challenge for that person is it's always difficult to be a prophet in your own land, as they say, and to be an agent of change. And often I think this is where case study might help them. You know, some companies are reluctant to be the early adopters of things, don't want to be too much at the leading edge of things, or bleeding edge in some cases. But case study, participation in things will show a momentum that's going on around that the company may wish to follow. Ultimately, if the person asking the question feels they can do more somewhere else, then there'll be other places that will be doing these things, and some will get left behind. I'm not advocating jumping ship for the sake of it, but there is an inevitability about these things going to happen, and showing the examples like we've seen on these panel discussions and the case studies is just the start. It's just the start of what's going to happen.
Yeah. So it's in leaning on the old Apple transformational change journeys. It's a case of identifying within organizations who your early adopters are, those that have a passion for technology, the Marco Raffias of the world. Finding those kind of people, building around some case studies that actually can exemplify the returns, perhaps de-risking them by terming them pilots or exploratory, exercises, recording the positive results and the positive enthusiasms, marketing those, if you like, in the educational process. But actually getting accelerated experience, getting people to try to get it on, and obviously developing a culture which rewards experimentation and trial rather than makes it too risky in a sense. But going further than that, as you say, it's actually recruiting a new breed of people that are coming through. I don't know what the average age of auditors are, but you've got to think, those kind of indices and find strategies of doing that. Your challenge is attracting new auditors when the current audit environment is not using the modern tools that young people would demand. Simulated products. I think it's gaming. I think it was a good way to position it, Anthony, in your session there. Okay, I think we probably, in deference to everybody's time schedules, we should probably close the session at this point. But before we close it, I'd just like to go around everybody just to see if you would like a last comment to make, and then we'll close the session and we'll pick up all the other questions from your emails and commit to responding to them, or finding the appropriate person to respond to them. So one last comment from all of yourselves, starting with you, Anthony. It's
okay. Last comment from me would be the fact that, we cannot go backwards. I think people have to recognize and embrace technology can do amazing things. It will definitely help people to do more, be faster, make less errors. So you're right that we need to be able to quantify, those gains, because there's an initial investment. But I think that's really important. But for auditors as well and audit schemes, I think we should reward people. So people that open themselves to digitalization and make hundreds or thousands of records available, where before, they were not much available for an auditor to pick up an error. So that behavior should be rewarded, because when you make your increased records available, you expose yourself to maybe more errors. So, opening yourself should be rewarded, not penalized.
excellent. Thank you. Marco, a last comment?
Yes, my comment is that a new process has begun, and we cannot go back to the past. We are not conscious about that, but at social level, our life is changed, and also our job and our activity. So I think that there is a big wave to ride, and we cannot stop that.
Thank you. Colin?
Yeah, just to touch upon the auditors and how important they're going to be, and they will evolve in the future. One initiative that's happening in the US is led by our chairman, Skip Greenaway. He has worked very closely with the US Department of Labor to get a new apprenticeship code approved for management systems auditor. Now, with an apprenticeship code, it brings in the young generation of auditors. And those young generation of auditors, if you look in the food safety space, people always say, well, I need someone that's worked in a factory in food safety for 20, 30 years before they become a good auditor. I agree 100% with that statement. What I see that being is a younger generation of auditor, to your point, Keith, that is tech savvy, that is sophisticated with data tools, will work alongside a experienced 30-year in the industry type food safety auditor, and they will complement each other so well, because the experienced head will, to Anthony's point, Andrew's point, will smell the factory, know the sounds, know they've been there and done that. They know what good looks like and what the problems are. And then you'll have a younger auditor complementing that person, doing the data dive, really finding the problems from a data perspective. So, and that's how you attract the younger generation of auditors. So I see a future of a sophisticated audit team, not just a lead auditor with 30 years experience.
Very, very interesting. Andrew?
Yeah, look, I appreciate a great deal that this could be a bit scary for some people that might be listening to this, but I had a fantastic career as an auditor. I, travelled, I saw different industries and different sectors, and it was wonderful. But if I was starting out now, I'd be quite excited about what's going to happen in this next period of time. And I think it's a great career for people to consider to move on to, and to be supported in, as Colin's just alluded. For our part, we're trying to provide some community for people that are working in the same industries, the same sectors. We're trying to give some support there through things like these expos. But we're also trying to harness some of the digital tools ourselves. We are creating a simulator for auditors at the moment. We're putting this together with Keith's help to try and get some experiential, almost gamifying it, as we said before, to build that experience and move through. We've got a digital human at the moment. She's called Emma. She's doing things like website tours, frequently asked questions. But the intention is that we will move over the next 12 months to her being able to do question and answer sessions, and to indeed to try and do role play, so you can practice some of these skills in the privacy of your own hotel room or whatever it might be, in little bits and pieces. And digital badges. This period of change is with us, unfortunately. And if we don't do this, somebody else will. So let's get involved. Let's everybody enjoy it. Let's take on the challenges and see what we can do and really make a difference to the world with the tools that we've got available to us now.
On that inspiring note, Mike, if you want to close the session as our host.
Yes, I will. Boy, that was a wonderful session, I have to say. I want to thank everyone for joining us, Keith especially for moderating. Thank you to all of our panelists. Boy, there was a lot of great information there, so I want to thank you all for joining us, and thank you all there watching us as well for being with us. I want to remind you all that please go ahead and purchase your CPD for this session. Hopefully you got a lot out of it. And again, thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to Keith for moderating. And we'll see you next time here at our next session here on the Food Safety Expo. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.